Thank you everybody for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I will be more than happy to introduce the team as well. But just a sincere thank you and appreciation for allowing us to present to you tonight and for you to be a participant. Along with me, I have Paul Callis that has joined as well, and both he and I work at For Hill International as your owner's project managers. Lee Sherwood from the LBA architectural team as the principal in charge, and David Harris, who's doing a wonderful job managing all of the slides that you are viewing tonight from the LBA team. And in a moment, you'll also hear from Ann Kidder from the LBA team, as well as David Stevens from New Vista Design. David Stevens will go through the educational mission and the educational visioning for tonight's meeting and all the content. I wanted to take a few moments to kind of recap and to give you some understanding of where we are in the schedule and how vital and important your attendance and your participation is for the success of this project. Today, as you see, the red line, the dotted line is marked by today's date, and what are we working towards? With these meetings and with these presentations and your comments, questions, all of it, we are gearing towards a July submission to the MSBA where we will have preliminary design program. And what that means is we will take all of the designs, we will kind of formulate them with all of our due diligence that we have been broadcasting up until now and continuing forward to the MSBA on that date. October, however, is when it is marked in red for a reason. That is the date that when our submission to the MSBA goes in, it is clearly identifying the preferred schematic design. Basically, the one option that is the preferred option for the town of Swampscott. So your involvement all the way up until that time frame is vital, and then going forward as well. From October till about, the April and June timeframe, I'm not going to say that your involvement isn't crucial. It still is your school, it is your town, and we always want to hear from you. But those are dates for us to keep in mind and make sure that we stay on track with all of the requirements set forth by the MSBA. September, again, is in red for a reason. That is the district-wide town vote, and where you as a town will voice your opinions and hopefully your approvals to move forward with this project as we lay forward. With that, I want to turn it over to Ann from the LBA team so that they can go over some of our project goals and set the plate for tonight's conversation. Thank you, Ann.
Vivian. Yeah, thank you, Vivian. Hi, everybody. So I just want to give you a quick recap of sort of some of the things that we've been doing up to this point. And as many of you recall, and hopefully some of you were there at the January workshops, we asked you to write down your dreams and your goals for this project. And this bubble diagram off to the left shows you what the results of those two workshops were. We saw that lots of people are really interested in sustainability and the site and location, but that we want a school that supports modern education, etc. And so what we did is we took those goals, we categorized them into 4 main categories, and we call these the pillars. And what that means is these pillars are going to be the driving factors that allow us to make decisions, the big decisions for your project. And those pillars are education, site and traffic, sustainability, and community. And so we're always going to be looking at the things that we do and the decisions we make through the lens of those pillars. Next slide, please. So starting with education, just a quick recap. We know that the MSBA has outlined 4 enrollment options for Swampscott. The first one is a district-wide K through 4. The second one is a district-wide just grades 3 through 5. The third is a K through 5, so that's kindergarten through 5, but only for half the district. And then the last option is to renovate or rebuild Hadley.
And looking at the site selection process, again, we had a very good and in-depth, detailed explanation of our process back in the April forum. But just distilling that down, we did look throughout the entire town at whatever was feasible, and through a series of rounds of elimination, if you will, got down to these sort of 5 last candidates, which included the DPW, the middle school, Stanley, Hadley, and the Phillips Park site. And then we put those sites through the lens of traffic. Traffic, of course, being a key concern of the town. And again, we stacked it up against multiple criteria under the traffic category. As you can see along the top here, we looked at all kinds of issues ranging from congestion to density to parking, queuing, walkability, also a very key thing, and of course, safety. And looking at them, having worked with our traffic consultant, who did a very thorough job at analysis. Again, I would encourage people to view that presentation. Again, we can see quite clearly what the sites start to stack up against in terms of the traffic performance. And again, the Phillips Park and DPW sites, as you can see here, ranked significantly lower than the other three sites that we're looking at. And taking that further in our follow-up presentation, where we looked at the actual site configuration options for each of the 5 sites, and again, plugging them and comparing them against those 4 pillars that Ann had noted: education, traffic, sustainability, and community. We can see how those locations and the enrollment options that those locations support, how they compare to each other. And again, at this point, after going through that thorough analysis, the Phillips Park and DPW sites do come up short, frankly, relative to their performance against the goals. And we would recommend that moving forward, that we focus on the Hadley, Stanley, and middle school sites to really focus in our efforts as we refine the options. And with regards to sustainability, we've been coordinating quite closely with the utility company, who has a very attractive incentive program that is a key goal of the town to take advantage of that opportunity. And as mentioned, the upcoming Sustainable Design Workshop will further our reach out to the community to understand what is important to the town relative to sustainability, and try to get a handle around those goals and how best to incorporate them successfully in a project.
So the 4th pillar really is community. And I'm sure for those of you that have attended these before, you've heard me say this, that we cannot design this building without your input, and that this process is really about creating a dialogue. And so here you can see some upcoming community workshops, and I encourage you all to come back and join us on May 19th to talk about sustainability, as David just noted, and also June 16th for preliminary options. That's no doubt going to be very exciting. Lee is busy working on that right now. And then at the end of June, a project overview. So please stay tuned and come back for those.
Definitely try to come in and watch the June 16th and be an active participant. Your voice is much needed in understanding the preliminary options and in helping make the decision what is right for Swampscott.
Exactly.
Now we'll turn it over to David Stevens. He's done a marvelous presentation, and I'll let him take it away.
All right, thank you, Vivian, and good evening, everybody. Happy to be here tonight. So my name is David Stevens. I'm with New Vista Design, located in Boston, and I'm the educational programmer as part of the design team. And my background is as both a licensed architect, but also an educator. I've spent the best part of the last 25 years working in and with schools. So I have worked with a lot of MSBA projects and also projects throughout the country, helping communities to frame a very clear educational and architectural vision for their new or renovated school to take maximum advantage of the opportunity. And in this process, which I'll be telling you about, and if you go to the next slide, David, that'd be great. We're really looking at high-level kind of priorities and trying to define priorities, as well as talk about what the possibilities are. So we share lots of different ideas about what schools throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the country have been doing to create sort of future ready, renovated or new buildings. And we had a series of 5 different workshops. The first one was with your leadership team to sort of get the lay of the land and sort of establish some big picture priorities. And then we worked with a group we call the Educational Working Group. That's got had about 34 people in it that included administrators from the town, teachers from all of the elementary schools and from the various schools, parents and students. There were about 34 people in the group, and we had 3 4-hour-long workshops with them. Now, the first one on February 11th really looked at educational vision and priorities and sort of what the district was thinking about in terms of what its cutting edge was, what's most exciting to it, what its strongest programs are, and what its challenges are. In the second workshop on February 25th, we looked at connecting that to ideas about buildings. And we talk about design patterns or design features, ways that buildings can be designed to support programming. And we also talked about guiding principles, big picture priorities, both educational and architectural. And in the third workshop, we put that all together and we talked about key spaces and adjacencies within the new school. Now, the Mass School Building Authority, as your funding partner here, they've got a very clear idea within their template of what kind of spaces are needed in a future-ready school. But we have a lot of creativity with regard to how we can think about co-locating those spaces and developing adjacencies. In addition to these 3 workshops, we also had a workshop with all of the faculty from each of the elementary schools on March 5th and shared with them many of these ideas, engaged them in a questionnaire and got a lot of feedback. So through this whole process, we've established big picture priorities. I'm going to share them with you now in the various categories. And we took very copious notes to feed this into a set of consolidated notes that really frame the priorities for this project. And if you go to the next slide. So as was mentioned, we're looking at 4 different enrollment options. The first one being a district-wide grades K through 4. The second, district-wide grades 3 through 5. Next slide. And option 3, K-5 for half the district. Option 4, renovate or rebuild a Hadley. But I will say that in terms of the priorities that we've defined within the visioning, they really transcend any of those particular enrollment options. We might look to them and the priorities that are established to sort of get a sense of which of these options could best meet the district's needs. But really we're looking at much sort of higher level, 30,000 foot kind of like, let's take a look at what we're most excited about educationally and what a renovated or new building might provide us. Next slide. So, and this is all also connected within the MSBA process. There is an educational plan that is quite in depth in which the MSBA wants the district to describe what you do now, how you do it, how a renovated or new building will help you do things differently, and how you are planning to optimize their space template. So this is about creating a narrative, a coherent narrative, establishing a common language about what is desirable. And again, that's what we'll be sharing with you tonight. And I've got about 30 minutes of presentation to do from this point on. And I'm going to go through things as clearly as possible, but we'll definitely be opening up for Q&A afterwards. So next slide. I'm going to start with the guiding principles and then come back to them, because guiding principles are sort of one of the things we did in the later workshops, but they sort of are, it's what I want to do is demonstrate how we got to these guiding principles through this process. So I should say that within these workshops, they were highly interactive. This was when we could still meet in person. The format of the workshops is such that that participants are meeting in table groups of about 5 or 6 people. We present information, and then it's really more about gathering information from the group and helping it to establish priorities. So there's lots of opportunity for conversation and for sharing with each other. And in that process, one of the things we did was what looking at what are the big picture guiding principles for design here. And this is what we came up with. We've got an educational and a community impact column. And the first one, starting out with education, equity, inclusion, and excellence came up as sort of primary importance. How can we create a school that is going to be inclusive of all learners, that establishes high expectations for all, and provides equitable educational experiences? Now, within that, we talked about collaboration and creativity as being particularly important. Using a whole child approach, which means that in addition to all of the great sort of mastery of core academic subject content, we're also exposing kids to a variety of enrichment opportunities, helping to meet them where they're at in terms of their learning style. So we want the teaching to be inspiring, and we want to be able to also engage students in a more student-centered or inquiry-based kind of instructive model. So this was discussed in the context of creating classrooms that are highly flexible, that allow sort of what we call center-based delivery, where you can be doing a variety of things in the classroom at the same time. Again, meeting kids where they're at in terms of their educational needs. And connected to that is the idea of flexibility and adaptability, having varied spaces and environments that can serve what you're doing now, but we know we have to be looking at this as a 50-year building minimum. And we want a building that's going to evolve along with teaching methods as they continue to evolve, and technology, as we know, will continue to evolve. Now, in the second column, we've got community impact. It was very important to the group that not only was the school sort of a heart of the community, but it was highly accessible to community members in a safe way. Of course, we're thinking about safety and controlling how people get into the school, but we're often thinking about taking those resources within a school that can serve the community, co-locating them in such a way that the community can access them after hours and on weekends. So part of that also is an efficient traffic flow between sort of the more public functions of the school and the more private functions and the classroom neighborhoods, if you will. And finally, we wanted this to be a beacon for all. Efficiency and sustainability came up many times within the workshops. First of all, fiscal and environmental responsibility, really using funds wisely, creating a building that was very practical and durable, not at all trendy, but really sort of serviceable and easy to maintain. Now, sustainability also connects to the idea of sustainable and economic sort of systems within the building, and the potential for the building itself to teach students to be good shepherds of the environment. Also in that list is the small school feel. It was very important to folks that there were small learning communities, whichever alternative is in terms of enrollment options is selected, that the school is designed in such a way where we have small orbits within it, so that students feel a sense of connection, ownership, and belonging, but they also feel a connection to the larger school, a sense of school pride. Now, down at the bottom there, kind of straddling both of those things, is the idea of outdoor connectivity. It was a recurring theme about the beauty of the town and its proximity to the ocean, and needing to make sure that that was honored within the building. Maybe as a reference point, maybe the building somehow talks about town history, but also that there were connections to outdoor play and learning, outdoor learning environments that were easy and safe to access and age appropriate. So these are the guiding principles that we ended up with, and let's go now to some of the other segments. So we started out with looking at priorities, and we looked at priorities through the lens of educational priorities, architectural, and community related. So I'll share what some of those are. Go to the next slide. So equity and access came up over and over again, meaning that all students would have access to similar programming within the school, within the district. And as that connected to special education, that was also a recurring theme. Certainly meeting community and district needs, both now and in the future. So looking sort of at what those needs are and how this building might be able to best meet those needs. Grade level alignment and consolidation, looking at what we call horizontal alignment across grades, but also vertical alignment as we move up and down the grades, and wanting to provide a consistent experience for students throughout the district. Safety and security, which is certainly something that's kind of a given. We're always going to be thinking about that as we design a building. And those security and safety measures are both passive and active. We'll be looking at how to really control access to the building, but also have active measures within the building. And then connected to that is also a sense of connectivity within the building, how easy it is to monitor things going on with the building at all times or within the building. Community use, as I said, was a priority in terms of big ticket items like the cafeteria, like the gymnasium, being able to access those areas, those multi-use spaces. Cost control and effectiveness, making sure that we're really looking at the most cost-effective approach to design. Sustainability as it connects to environmental sustainability and active and passive measures. If you go to the next slide. Other priorities, special education alignment, making sure that special education services can be maintained within the district and provided to students, no matter what grade they were in. Spaces that support engaging and inspiring 21st century learning. So the idea of visible learning and inspiration was something that came up a lot. Neighborhood schools and a small school feel. That's very important to the community, we know, and that connects to the idea of creating small learning communities within any building that we do. Breakout collaboration and gathering spaces. That's something that's kind of different about how we do schools now. We're looking at the classroom as still being the basic building block, but we also are looking at, first of all, Wi-Fi throughout the building and providing venues, all the between spaces between classrooms, what used to be hallways, looking at the idea of breakout spaces, areas for collaboration, and areas for small group gathering as well as large group gathering and community building. Support for enrichment, music, art, and performance. We know that's very, very important to the district in terms of its whole child approach, and flexible spaces and adaptable spaces. And I got one more page of priorities here. Improved technology. Now with this MSBA opportunity, new technology comes along. We never choose the technology until right before the building is about to be occupied, because that's continuing to evolve. And we know it will continue to evolve. So we need to think about technology as something that's there when you need it, and there are no barriers to accessing it, places to store it, places to charge it. Outdoor connections, play and learning opportunities that are age appropriate for students. The idea of classrooms outside as well, and having wired spaces outside where you might be able to use technology outside. Hands-on learning, the idea of, and that connects to makerspace now. That's something that certainly many schools are thinking about. How do we provide a more project-based or hands-on opportunity for students? So we're looking at that within spaces we call makerspaces that are like technology labs or a STEM lab, as well as in all of our classrooms. We want to be able to support that kind of hands-on learning. We talked about the idea of a dispersed library, the library taking on primary importance as a hub of the school, but also maybe dispersing some of the functions within it or within the library itself, creating opportunities for collaboration as well as quiet work. Good storage, really important in any school these days, especially as we think about doing more hands-on and project-based work. And then finally, safe and practical bathrooms that are interspersed in places throughout the school, so students and adults don't have to travel far to be able to get to a bathroom. So these are some of the big picture priorities that we established. If we go to the idea of future-ready learning goals, we did spend quite a bit of time talking about what does future-ready or 21st century learning look like to the district, and in terms of being able to deliver the 6 R's, something we always think about, every bit as important as it always has been: reading, writing, and arithmetic, rigor, relevance, and relationship. And something that in the 21st century now, for the last 20 years, we've been thinking a lot about the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And many communities also add the idea of citizenship as a 5th C. Now, these are things that are baked into state standards, into our next gen MCAS, into our next gen science standards as well. So they're things that are really higher order thinking skills. So those basic, that mastery of core academic content is every bit as important, but we also need to be working with kids about developing these higher order thinking skills. That connects to the idea of hand in hand, and also social emotional learning. Now, social emotional learning is helping kids to develop a sense of their own learning style, to be able to learn how to self-moderate, and be self-reflective, how to communicate their ideas. And that all plays into the idea of student-centered approaches. Technology is infused where you need it, when you need it. We want to be fully inclusive because we're differentiating instruction for students depending on their needs. And that connects to the idea of what we call universal design for learning, being able to really vary sort of the ways that that information is delivered. And that connects also to hands-on learning, STEM and STEAM. So these are some of the themes that we were exploring. If you go to the next slide. We're definitely seeing some major shifts in the way we look at schools and school buildings. We're moving from a more teacher-centric to a student-centric, active learning environment, flexible learning environments where technology is there, as I said, where you need it, when you need it. Kids might have multiple devices, especially a few years from now. We want there to be collaborative opportunities, but we also want spaces for kids to get quiet and focused, and we want to support subject as well as project-based work. Next slide. And this really connects to what a lot of people are thinking about in terms of sort of skills for the new economy or workforce readiness. So when we look at the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report in 2020, we see that all of these skills are really connected to those 4 C's and to social emotional intelligence and learning. And so it's not just a nice idea to be doing this, but it's also something that schools feel is pretty important to be able to prepare kids for their education and for the world of work. Next slide. And social emotional learning, as I mentioned, also connects to this idea of growth mindset or academic mindset, where we really work with students around developing mindfulness, resilience, and grit, and not seeing failure as something that's a horrible thing, but rather celebrating discovery and experimentation. And actually that has a lot of implications for a building and how we make learning visible within a building. So next slide. So I'm going to share now something we did was a future ready learning goals activity. And if you go to the next slide. So these are the future ready learning goals that the educational working group developed. And we did this over the span of 2 workshops. We developed it in our first workshop, and then we kind of refined it in the second workshop. And so I'll start with up at the top. We've got this kind of umbrella theme that people thought was very important about curiosity, imagination, and play, and really building in the wonder and joy of learning, helping students learn how to be lifelong learners and sort of explore creatively. So that's kind of the umbrella at the top. At the bottom, the foundation is the mastery of core academic content. Nobody forgets that this is the reason why we're all there, in terms of working with kids around their basic skill foundations and the balance of core academics and social skills with real world application. And then in the middle, you've got basically, and this again, what we did is we had 6 different groups that worked on their own version of learning goals. We combined all their lists and saw what rose to the top. And people really kind of highlighted a lot of the 4 C's: the critical thinking, the communication, the collaboration, and the citizenship. And so, as well as adaptability and risk-taking. So we did this activity early on before we got to talking about any of the building stuff, because we feel that it's very important before we think about the kind of building we want to think about the kinds of learning that we want to support within that building. Next. And so in terms of another activity we did something called a SCOG analysis, looking at the strengths, challenges, and opportunities and goals. If you go to the next slide. And just focused on each of these realms to see what is it that the district does and your elementary schools do really well that we want to make sure to support. Got a healthy school culture, very strong sense of community with focus on social emotional learning, whole child approach, a good embrace of special education, and a commitment to best practices and the kind of professional development that supports that. Having stable leadership and faculty, which is really key, a collaborative environment, and small connected learning community, good and safety, and lots of all parents and community. We also look, if you look at the next slide, at challenges that the district felt they were facing. Up at the top of the list was the lack of equity, sort of making sure that each child within each school had access to the same programming, meeting diverse student needs. This is a theme across the Commonwealth because those student needs are becoming more and more diverse. Economic resources, the school and district is very well resourced in certain ways, but there's always decisions and trade-offs that need to be made. Some people felt that the small elementary schools and the size of the district was a challenge because it didn't allow you to do as many things as you might like. Community buy-in support came up as a challenge, and really opening up channels of communication to very clearly communicate what the district was doing and what it was excited about, especially within the context of this project. Special education delivery, making sure that that was fully supported. Another challenge that was mentioned was perceived disconnect sometimes between the town and the schools. And again, really factoring into this goal of being able to communicate as clearly as possible what this vision is and what the hope is for this project. Aging building and infrastructure, or aging buildings within the district, need to address that. So one of the challenges people felt might be nostalgia, sort of a connection to school buildings and the way they are and have always been, or at least in our lifetimes. Density is certainly a challenge in terms of the building site or sites that we're looking at, and the need for new programming. Go to the next slide. So out of this, we articulated a list of opportunities and goals for this project, big picture goals. Chief among them is creating an innovative, state-of-the-art and sustainable school building that increases academic cohesion and unity, improves safety, makes more equitable access to resources, uses resources efficiently in terms of fiscal responsibility, consolidates grade levels in a way that allows the district to, again, make sure that every student is having the same experience, build buy-in and excitement for this project and for the work that the district is doing, and improve traffic and parking, which we know is an ongoing issue. So I'm going to shift now to another focus, which is really about when we get into the building stuff. So this is what we call design patterns or features of a building. I'm going to share about 15 different kind of groups of design patterns that we discussed as being very important. The first is security and welcome. So making sure that we make it really obvious where the entry to the school is, that there's maybe protection from the weather outside. But then once you enter in, we have an entry vestibule that you can buzz people into. You have a couple of chances to say no. You might have a bank teller slot into the admin suite and connect it to this, the idea of safe drop off and pickup areas, and the idea of greeting and gatekeeping. So once you do get in, you want to see a friendly face and have a clear idea of where you're going within the building. Next slide. Classroom neighborhoods. Now, this is something that we see a lot of schools trying to work with in terms of getting the bang for the buck. This idea here is that you're creating small learning communities simply by co-locating groups of classrooms. In this case, they would be clustered grade level, as well as a shared common space and breakout rooms. Now, the common space that you see in the photo in the upper right there, that's in the Zervis Elementary School in Newton. And that would otherwise be a hallway area. Now, we have defined circulation through that area for fire egress, but it also, furnished with some simple furniture and connectivity to the classrooms, becomes a way to unite those classrooms as a neighborhood. And so connected to that idea of classroom neighborhoods is transparency and connection, where you can see out into these spaces, see into the classrooms. Next slide. Now, the classroom itself, we want to be as agile as possible. We want to be thinking about flexible furniture. We want to be thinking about good natural light, the ability to have modular furniture in such a way that you can create different zones within the classroom. People like the idea of sliding doors that went out into the hallway, or breakout rooms, and certainly lots of storage within the classroom as well. Next slide. Another pattern is community access. Now, these are two MSBA elementary schools. The top one is the Hunking School in Haverhill. The lower one is the Jacob School in New Bedford. And both of them are new buildings. And what they've done is created sort of a co-located cafetorium with a gym, and also media center in the case of Hunking, and centralized those and made it accessible to the community after hours. So these really are essentially community centers that can be used after hours and on weekends. They can be used as a revenue generating stream also for the district in terms of a multi-use space. So these are things that we're often thinking about in terms of how to make sure that the building is getting maximum use by the community. Next slide. Now, extended learning spaces connects to the idea of classroom neighborhoods. And here's a couple of examples of furnished areas where you have lockers and whiteboards and some very flexible furniture around which are clustered classrooms. So this creates an opportunity for larger group gatherings. Now, the MSBA often likes these areas because we're using what would otherwise be circulation space as usable teaching space, and it builds in a lot of flexibility. In the area in the bottom, you see that's the Zervis School, also the Runkle School in Brookline, and you see just by putting a window out into a hallway space, it allows you to create a learning space out there. Next slide. Breakout and quiet and pullover spaces. We have a lot of space within the MSBA template that is connected to special education service, and we need to distribute that throughout the school. So in the picture there, up in the upper left, that's the Beverly Middle School, and that you see is a breakout room accessible from 2 classrooms on either side of it with some sliding doors. We also can build in nooks into, in the lower picture, the library at the Zervis School, or a classroom nook at the MLK School in the upper picture. So we're looking at ways to create spaces where special education can be delivered in close proximity to the classroom, but also serve as a breakout room for just general education purposes and to build flexibility in. Next slide. Multipurpose cafe. Again, these are all design patterns that were prioritized by the group. And in the MSBA template, in any elementary school, we're talking about a cafetorium with a full stage and lighting and sound. And these are highly sort of adaptable and nice spaces to be in. Not what you might think of as an old version of a cafetorium. We need to be thinking about good sound acoustics within this space, but it creates a very multi-use space. We also are thinking about the cafeteria as being used as a teaching and learning space, not just during food service, but before school, after school. we needed to play double duty as a highly adaptable multi-purpose space. Next slide. The Media Center Commons. Now, we are looking at our library in any new or renovated school as being sort of the hub of the school, a place where we might have whole school gatherings or large, not whole school, but large gatherings or presentations, a space that has a very flexible floor plan and very good natural light. Next slide. STEM and STEAM. Now, the MSBA template has in it what they call an STE space, a science, technology, engineering space. The M in STEM stands for math, and the A in STEAM stands for arts. And so that's kind of a multidisciplinary hands-on approach where you have a hands-on lab. Now, in the picture, in the upper picture here, that's the Jacob School, and that's their Maker Spark, they call it their Spark Lab. And you see it's got a garage door that opens directly out onto a roof deck where there are planters and weather stations. And it's got flexible furniture, lots of storage, and it's got a STEM program that's connected to it. Next slide. Outdoor learning came up as very important. We can think about outdoor classrooms, engaged outdoor play, and the idea of gardens that could possibly connect to the sustainability effort within the school or lunch programming. Next slide. And sustainability. We talked about the idea of building as teachers, so maybe exposing some of the systems in parts of the building, certainly natural light and passive orientation whenever possible, having an open feel. But in many of the schools that we've been doing, we've been actually allowing the teachers and the students to interact with the systems, or at least to see the minute-by-minute use of energy within the building and embed that within the curriculum. Okay, next slide. History and storytelling. This is the idea that we want to be able to curate some storytelling within the school. We want to have lots of venues for display and exhibition of student work, foster branding and identity, a sense of ownership within the community, and bring in, should this be a combined enrollment, bring in history from the Clark, Stanley, Hadley, and Macon. So that was also something that was discussed, as well as the preservation of existing murals. Next slide. Another pattern that we talked about was just internal flow and wayfinding. And we often think about this in terms of graphics within the building, but also using color and materials to help, and floor patterning to help guide people through the building and to differentiate different areas of the building so they don't look all the same or institutional. Next slide. A few other design patterns we talked about: professional work areas, having good storage both within the classroom and within departments, cubbies for students that were very visible, distributing resources in the form of adults within the building, throughout the building, and certainly creating centrally located support and enrichment spaces. Next slide. And this is the last one for design patterns. A good sized gym that can accommodate multiple classes at any one time. Depending on the location, we talked about the possibility of a roof deck if the outdoor space was really constrained, and thinking about adequate parking and how to make sure that we're considering that. Finally, what I'm going to do is share with you some of the blue sky ideas and bubble diagrams that were done in the workshop. This was in workshop 3, and we got people putting pen to paper and working in small groups to think about the things that were most exciting and compelling for them. And some of the blue sky ideas we talked about were highly flexible classrooms within classroom neighborhoods, professional learning spaces, the idea of an innovation center, which might connect to a makerspace or connect to the idea of some spaces like the library becoming an innovation center where there's a makerspace connected. Next slide. Also the idea of a flexible artistic space for performance, and really looking at multi-purpose use of the cafeteria, and the library media center, again, is very centrally located. Next slide. Other blue ideas, a state-of-the-art kitchen, maybe with breakout areas for lunch and recess within it. The idea of an outdoor classroom and maybe a covered outside patio, and certainly a playgrounds. Next slide. And now we get into finally some diagrams that the groups did. We have here a whole school diagram looking at that idea of co-locating those big ticket spaces like the library, the gym, the cafeteria, administration, conferencing area, music and art in a more public, sort of centrally located area, and then having neighborhoods of classrooms that provide small learning communities to the side. And what this means is we're also really minimizing circulation through the building and the need for hallways. So that was one diagram. Go to the next one. Here's a diagram for school entry, the idea of having a covered area when you first enter, a waiting area right by the administration once you get sort of buzzed in, having a nurse's suite and a guidance suite right nearby admin, and then easy access to the cafeteria and gym. But there's also an arrow there which makes me think that this group was talking about having also a separate entry for the cafeteria and gym for the community. Next slide. And this is a diagram that one of the groups did of a classroom neighborhood where you have a collection of classrooms co-located, also with breakout rooms, with a teacher workroom, with a bathroom, and a gathering area. So that in itself becomes a small learning community within the school. Next slide. Community resources, another take on looking at the idea of an innovation center, cafeteria, gym, art and music, outdoor amphitheater, covered patio, and a greenhouse, all being sort of connected to the public realm that would be accessible to community. Next. The Library Media Center at the core of the school. This was kind of looking at the idea of having an amphitheater type space within it where it could be kind of like a performance space, but also a gathering space where you have open area upstairs with tables and quiet area for reading and different venues within it, including a maker space that also is connected to the cafe. And next slide. Multi-purpose space. Here's one group's take at having a maker space and with a garage door that opens up to the outside. Having, I think the idea was that this would be in close connection to the cafeteria or multi-purpose cafe space. The idea of having an aquarium, having the sort of bringing the ocean in and having a fish aesthetic there, and also bringing in a lot of green. Next. And finally, I'm going to come back to the guiding principles, as this is where we started out. So again, looking at the big picture, both educational and community priorities that were established in these 3 different workshops that we did. And I will say also that when we met with the entire faculty of your elementary schools, we worked on also these priorities, and there was a lot of resonance with the work that have been done. And we have teachers' responses to all of the sort of the design patterns that they prioritize as well. And they were very similar, that larger group to the smaller working group. So this is where we started out. I think I'll finish off there, but I'll just reiterate again: equity, inclusion, and excellence, collaboration and creativity, flexibility and adaptability, all as being connected to the idea of educational excellence, community impact being connected to the idea of community access, efficiency and sustainability, and having a small school feel but large school sense of connection. And then outdoor connectivity as really kind of spanning both of those realms. So I think if you go to the next slide, I think Vivian's going to talk a little bit about some next steps, and then we'll open up for some Q&A.
Thank you, David, so much. And as part of the next steps, we want you to please mark your calendars and participate along with us as we take this journey together in developing what is the right selected school as well as the right location for the new elementary school. The next SBC meeting, where you're always welcome to join in, will be hosted on May 12th, virtually via Zoom, as well as we look to host another community public forum such as this one on the topic of sustainable design workshop, where your involvement and participation is greatly appreciated. What we will look to obtain from you is, what does sustainability really look like? Your ideas and thoughts on how vital they are, as well as establishing common goals and the MSBA sustainable design policies that we have to adhere to. We are also, excuse me for my allergies, but we are also working with NSTAR and their energy efficiency incentives, and we will hear from one of their members in discussing and providing some information on this incentive program. Mark your calendar for the 19th of May, as well as for some of the other ones that are upcoming. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. The next slide will give you information as well as a reminder of how you can participate and look for previous seminars, as well as submit your questions and emails via text, email, or just through the Zoom Q&A function. At this time, if you have any questions, please feel free to use any of these outlets to ask your questions. There's got to be some questions out there.
I think it's a testament to the team's thoroughness that there are no questions on this topic.
I don't know. I think it's also, you know, the team, I have to applaud them. Everyone's getting better and better at these Zoom meetings. Finally, we've got one question, so I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Neil asks, are there standards or recommendations or requirements from the MSBA or otherwise for a ratio between classroom space and breakout space? Great question, Neil.
David or Lee, do you want to take a hand at that? Or
David, I think it'd be best if you would answer that.
okay, so I don't know that there are any hard and fast sort of requirements. I think that the MSBA is always looking at sort of the ratio of core space and to like usable program space to the core spaces and circulation spaces. So what they've been very interested in is maximizing the use of what would otherwise be circulation space to provide some of these extended learning environments. And they're always looking at sort of what that ratio is between sort of the core spaces within the architectural program and the total square footage of the building. So as long as we're keeping circulation, and this is where building in sort of really minimizing circulation space buys you other additional square footage within their template, because as long as we're really looking carefully at that ratio, we have more opportunities to create some of those extended learning spaces.
Thanks, David. That's a great answer.
This is Lee Sherwood. When we spoke to the faculty, that's when we get a really good sense of how they want to use breakout spaces. For example, there are some areas like David was just talking about, which are in hallways or extended hallways and places where people gather. But there are other spaces that want to be kind of more quiet and closed between rooms, or used in very flexible different kinds of ways. So we've been working with the faculty as well in understanding what's the best way for them to deliver their program with the children, and make sure that it fits with their abilities as well.
Thank you, Lee. While we're on the topic of teachers, Lindsay asks, what were the elementary teachers feeling toward the different grade configurations, i.e. a K through 4 whole school, rebuilding Hadley, a 3 to 5 school, etc.?
Well, I think I can answer that, since David and I were on all of the calls with the faculty. there seemed to be a very strong connection between kindergarten and first grade in your town. Now, different schools are a little different in how they're arranged, and I think that was also agreed upon by the principals and by your superintendent, Pam. Kindergarten and first grade are integrally linked in how they learn and in the kind of process that they go through to grow from one to the other. Second grade becomes a little bit of a transition. Then 3 and 4, you're starting to become, the big kids again. So that was the overall feeling that we got.
Was there a particular emphasis on any of the 4 configuration options among the teachers?
Well, I think that's a fair question. Since we actually met with all 3 elementary school teachers, all the teachers from all 3, and we did that purposefully so that we could get a sense of everyone's concept to this. I think that there was a focus on the idea of having district-wide grade-based learning. In other words, it was better with the faculty and with the district level leadership to have first grade, everyone in first grade in the whole district in the same place, or everyone in third grade in the same place, and not to separate them. That had a lot to do with providing services such as special education, which is very complicated since you do deliver a lot of your own internal special education programs in town. And I think that because of that, the ones that really stood out, the enrollment options, were the enrollment option for the district-wide K through 4, which is the largest school, which is 900 students, because that took care of all of those kids at the same level, and it was very equitable. And that's, of course, the largest. But there is also a good deal of focus on the idea of a 3 through 5 enrollment, so that the K through 2s could stay at the existing Stanley and Clark, and then a 3 through 5 could maybe be built at Hadley or something. And again, that was because of the equity issue and the ability to provide your services much more efficiently and much better, especially special education.
Thanks, Lee. That's I know that's come up before, and I found that answer really interesting as well. We have a couple of additional questions that don't deal specifically with this evening's topic, but I think they've come up and are worth addressing here. I'd like to start out with a question from Mary. Can you remind us what the timeline is for this project? I know we saw a little bit at the top of the discussion. You might want to flip back to that slide, Vivian. She continues, when do we anticipate a decision on location and building? And thanks everyone for their work, which I would second.
Thank you. Just give us one moment as we backtrack to that slide. It was very early on. Here we go. And as we had said earlier, the July timeframe is really to give a submission to the MSBA that provides a preliminary design program. And what that really means is the 3 ones that we have narrowed down to as providing that information, as well as all of the due diligence that we have done behind the scenes to the MSBA. The October timeframe is one that is marked in red for a specific reason. That is where we would look for you and to identify the preferred schematic design, meaning we would also be selecting which option we would be selecting, as well as providing somewhat of a location, not the exact footprint, but definitely identified one of the 3 as the preferred option that we would be submitting to the MSBA. The April timeframe, whereas the schematic design submission is where the design kind of starts to take real shape and becomes a little bit more than conceptual and doing the feasibility in what the look and feel might look like. The June is when the MSBA has a board that reviews all of our documentation as well as provides comments, insight, and votes on approval. Based off of that, once we have the MSBA approval, we would seek townwide vote and approval in September.
Great. Thank you, Vivian. On that, a related topic, particularly as it involves the MSBA, Linda asks, do we have any indication from the state about any budget issues that might arise given the current economic environment?
I can answer that one. I have been in daily contact with the MSBA, and they have been very, very accommodating. They completely understand that a lot of these towns and municipalities, unlike Swampscott, are unable to host Zoom meetings and keep up with the current schedule. We are very fortunate that we not only have a wonderful SBC group, also the entire, architectural team has collectively worked together to present these information sessions so that we can keep our project on schedule and moving forward. So with that, they have not discussed any cuts or drawbacks in funding, but what it might result in new projects coming on board later in the year. We're fortunate where we have already been admitted and will proceed. As long as we're maintaining our schedule and our timelines, we should be in good shape for now.
Great. Thank you, Vivian. That helps. Neil asks a follow-up. I love the idea of using this building and the technology as a teaching tool, but his question is, would teachers be trained? Would they need to be trained in some way on how to most effectively do this? Would some sort of guides or orientation be necessary?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of going to jump in and speak for the superintendent, and she is more than welcome to jump in. She has put together a very robust educational programming and educational plan that mirrors not only what David Stevens' work has been. She's utilized all of the information found in his visioning sessions, as well as working with the architectural team in making sure that the spaces and all of the MSBA requirements are being met. Among her educational program and plan is training for her staff as well. And all of the training needs are addressed in that plan that will be submitted to the MSBA for approval.
Great, that helps, Vivian. Thank you very much. That really brings us to the end of the questions we've had this evening. I'm going to leave this open for a few more minutes in case people are typing slowly, but I want to express my thanks to all the professionals on the call tonight and all the committee members. It's been extremely informative and really well prepared and presented.
I'd also like to jump in and really thank David Stephen for the work that you did, the sessions that you held, the group that we put together. It was a great cross-section of everyone in the community, and this has been such a thoughtful, thorough analysis and process. Every voice was heard. Lee for taking time to meet with all the teachers and going school to school and scheduling all of those meetings to hear individual voices. I think one of the things you found was, though there are different cultures at each of the 3 elementary schools, it's a very tight-knit group across the district, because even if I go back to my teaching days, we all bounced from building to building, so everyone's very, very comfortable with everyone across the district. But I really do want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you did and getting us to where we are now. Thank you so much for that work.
It was a pleasure, and I was glad we were able to do it in person, because I'm running all these workshops now online.
Yeah, the in-person was great.
All right, seeing no more questions, Katie, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right, thank you, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for those of you who are on Facebook or who are watching us from cable. We really appreciate all of the participation and having informed community members. Again, we will be posting the video from this presentation along with the videos from the other presentations on the SBC website. So please, please, please visit the website. Sign up for the email notifications if you haven't yet. You can always email SBC@Swampscott in order to ask any future questions you have, and we will email you back, or we'll tag your question on a future presentation. Our next community meeting is May 19th. So that will be our sustainable design workshops. That is actually very necessary to have people from the community come in and give priorities. It's where we start thinking about costs and benefits and balancing things out in terms of current costs and future costs, and trying to really think about how we want to build this building and what we want this building to be like, or renovate the building, or how are we going to make these choices. So please, please, please come visit us then. Stay informed, stay in touch, and stay safe. Thank you so much for joining us.